welcome to Struggles of the Spirit. I'm Lee Udell, your host, and I'm delighted that you're with us again today. We had to cancel for a while this program, but we're back in business. And it's nice to be back in business, to be back doing the old thing, because it really livens up your whole soul, and it makes everything different. So this is a program that's live, which means you can phone in and say something. You can respond to what you've heard. You don't have to just sit there silently like you do for all the other TV shows on television. You can talk and speak out whatever you want to talk about. And we really want to hear from you. We want to hear your voice on the TV, and we don't want to just have you sitting there silently. So please, please, please be responsive to us, and make the show come alive. Now, you're Lee Udell, host. You have a lot of other hosts on this show, but I'm the one who has to deal with religion and spirituality and a lot of other issues related. So we want to hear from you, and we're looking forward to interaction with you. We have it the title Struggles of the Spirit, because we don't want to make it just Christian. We don't want to make it just clerical. We want to make it wide open. And I think we've achieved that. So we're going to talk about, well, yes, we have a guest. Thank you. Our guest is sitting over here. Where are you?
I'm right over here, Lee. Charlie Nardozzi.
Charlie Nardozzi. Charlie, we really like having you here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, you were on here once long ago.
Yeah, a number of years ago I came on, probably around this time of year. And talked about gardening and things that are going on in the garden. We're having a real warm spell right now, this week especially.
Did you predict it?
Oh yes, of course. The sap is flowing and the earth is waking up. You can smell it. That's what I really love about this time of year. You can really smell the earth starting to wake up and the soil starting to thaw out. So there's lots of things that you can start to be thinking about in the garden that you can get ready to do and actually start doing already. And we have an hour here to chat gardening. And we'll talk back and forth, of course, but if people want to call in with garden questions, that's kind of why I'm here. So you can just give us a call. The number is on the screen, and we can answer some garden questions, and I'll just keep chatting about all kinds of different aspects of gardening.
You may be puzzled about why certain plants have not pulled through the winter ever, or why they always pull through. And Charlie will try to answer your questions. So let's have a little fun here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point, Lee, just about some plants that don't survive the winter. And this is a time of year you can start looking around your landscape and noticing the health of your plants. Even though a lot of people may still have snow on the ground or snow nearby, you can take a look at some of the evergreens in particular, like some of the yews, junipers, cedars, hemlocks, and some of the broadleaf evergreens like rhododendron and even mountain laurel, if you're growing mountain laurel in some of the warmer spots. And what you can do is take a look at the evergreen leaves and see if they're brown. If they're brown, that means they've got some kind of winter injury that happened during the season. And it could have been from salt spray off the road. It could have been broken branches. It could have just been from the extreme cold, even though we didn't really have that cold of a winter. It's tricky sometimes. You know, you don't really see temperatures down -20, so you think most plants should survive. But then you see some damage on your plants and you wonder why. Well, there's a lot of contributing factors to why plants may not make it through the winter, or why the leaves might die. And it's not just the absolute cold, but it can be when the cold occurred. If it occurred early in the season before the plants completely hardened off, that'll cause some damage. And also if there is wind associated with it. We might have a 0 or -10 degree day, but if it's really windy, that's going to dry out those evergreen needles and leaves, and what's going to be left is a dried and shriveled up plant. So this time of year you can go out there and take a look and see where the spots are brown, what leaves are kind of shriveled and dried up, and that'll give you an indication of whether that plant had a rough time coming through the winter, or if it's going to survive into the spring. But you don't want to make any actions quite yet. You don't want to go out there and actually start cutting things down and pulling plants out, because what may look like a damaged plant, it might be one that will bounce back. I'm often reminded of the rhododendrons, like the PJM rhododendrons, and they sometimes have these broadleaf leaves that will curl and be brown, and then often you just think it's a dead plant. But sometimes those leaves will drop and the stems will still be alive, and you'll get some new leaves coming out from the stems, and so your plant may actually have survived. So you don't need to actually take action right now, but it's good to actually go around and take a look at the plants and see what shape they're in.
Now, Charlie, when do you go and prune your plant?
Well, that's a good question. This is a great time of year to actually do some pruning, especially of deciduous trees like your apple trees, any of the fruit trees, apples, pears, cherries, plums. It's a good time to do those. The ones you want to avoid this time of year are the ones that we say bleed out really quickly, like the maple trees. Of course, the sap is running, so that's what's bleeding out is the sap. And birch trees. You probably don't want to be pruning those this late in the year. It probably would have been better to prune them a little bit earlier in the winter, or maybe do some summer pruning of those. But if you're pruning apples and cherries and pears and crab apple trees, this is a good time to do that. And when you're pruning them, you want to try to open up the tree. And the old rule of thumb is that you want to be able to see a robin fly through the tree, that it's so open. So if you see birds flying through your fruit trees after you're done pruning, you've done a good job. You want to remove any crossing branches, ones that are rubbing against each other, remove the weaker of the two. Any broken branches, obviously, or any branches that seem like they're diseased or have some kind of insect damage on them. You want to take those out as well. And you want to favor some of the bigger branches so you have a nice structure to the tree with some what we call scaffolds of branches going around. So one layer, and then above that another scaffold of branches that go 360 degrees around the trunk, so you have a real even design of the tree and its growth. And also we want to keep it open, as I mentioned, so that the sun can get down into the interior of the tree and ripen those apples and fruits that are that'll end up being a little bit shaded from the foliage.
I've always liked the prune because I've enjoyed it, because it gives me a sense of completion, of accomplishment, of moving ahead with my tree, and things are getting better, and they're not just stagnant. Mm-hmm. And it gives me a good feeling.
Yeah, it's a fun thing to do. It's actually more of an art than a science in some ways. I try to explain it to people in a scientific way, and a lot of times I get this puzzled look on people's faces of, what do you mean? So it's really one of those skills that's best shown when you go out there and work with someone who knows how to prune trees, to actually show folks how to do it. And it really becomes more of an artistic expression as far as making the tree look like you want it to look, as well as being really healthy too. And pruning, like a lot of things in life, when you prune something, you might be cutting things back or you might be taking things away, but what it does is also stimulates new things. And so when you prune a tree, you're going to be stimulating some new branches to come up from right below where you pruned. So that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're deciding where to prune and how to prune. For example, you want to always prune so that the new branches are kind of moving away from the tree and not towards the center of the tree. So when you go down to a branch and you prune it, you want to prune right above a bud or a side branch that's pointing in the direction you want the new branch to go. And by pruning above that on an angle, you're going to stimulate that new branch to grow in the direction you want, and also not introduce disease, because if you cut on an angle, all the water will kind of run off, so the water won't stay there and rot that branch.
Say that again.
So when you prune on an angle, mm-hmm. you have a branch that comes up and you prune it on an angle, like a 45-degree angle as opposed to straight across.
Right.
What that does is allows the water, when it rains, to run right off of that wound, right off of that cut. So it doesn't sit there. And when water sits on a cut or a wound, it tends to sink in and it'll initiate some rotting so that other disease organisms can follow it.
That's intriguing.
Yeah. So pruning is a great thing to do this time of year before the buds start swelling. There's certain things you don't want to prune though this time of year, especially if you have shrubs that are going to be blooming in the spring. Things like forsythia, lilac, spirea, any of the spring blooming shrubs. Those, if you prune this time of year, you're going to actually be removing the flowers. You'll be even doing that with crab apples too. But crab apples are so prolific and they produce so many flowers that it's really okay to prune this time of year. And a fun thing to do with any of those prunings of those crabapple trees is to take them and bring them indoors, cut them to about, well, maybe a couple feet long, and then put them in a vase with some warm water. And what happens is those buds are already ready to pop. As soon as the weather turns, they're ready to pop. If you bring them into a warm house and put them in some warm water, within a week or two, you'll actually have flowers coming out. So you'll be forcing those flowers indoors.
Is that what it means when you say you're forcing the flowers?
Yes, exactly. You're forcing it by making it bloom when it normally would not be blooming. So you could do that with any of the spring bloomers. If you want to prune some of your forsythia, because they're such a huge shrub anyway, you can take some branches of forsythia, maybe even take a few lilac branches, some spirea branches. Just a few of them though. You don't want to do a lot of pruning because you'll ruin the rest of the show later. But put them together in a vase in warm water in your house, and you'll be amazed. By a week or two later, you'll have some beautiful flowers.
We'll have to do that.
Yeah, it's a fun thing to do. It's a fun way to use those prunings and not just throw them out. And does bring up the idea of what to do with the prunings once you cut back branches. And probably one of the best things to do is to chip them up, is to actually use them in your landscape. So you can rent a chipper shredder, or maybe a neighbor might have one, and you can chip up these branches into small little wood chips and then spread them around your shrubs or your flowers, and it acts as a nice mulch for your garden, keeping the soil cool and moist and keeping the weeds away. Yeah. So pruning branches and pruning fruit trees is a great thing to do this time of year. It's also a good time of year to start planning your garden and planning your vegetable garden, and to do a little shameless self-promotion. I do have a new book out called Vegetable Gardening for Dummies. And not saying that any of you are dummies, or you, Lee, but it's actually a basic vegetable garden book. If you've ever done any of the dummies books, if you've already read any of those dummies books, you know they have them for a multitude of different topic areas, computers and motorcycles and everything. So Vegetable Garden for Dummies is really a great basic book, and it's one that I wrote about 10 years ago, and then we just revised it this past winter because of the upsurge in vegetable gardening. A lot of people are out there growing edibles, more so than ever before actually, and there's a lot of interest in growing them, and a lot of young people, a lot of new people are coming to vegetable gardening, so they really need some of the basics to really get themselves started. And that's what we cover in the book. We cover all the basics on everything from arugula to tomatoes and beyond that too. And also I spend a few chapters in the book talking about the economics of growing your own vegetables. And this is...
You save money?
You can save a lot of money actually. And this is one of those topics that is really getting a lot of attention. And I notice a lot of people are getting interested in growing vegetables not only to save money, but to also follow a value path that they may have, one where they want to live more lightly on the earth, where they want to use less fossil fuels, want to contribute less to global warming. So they're trying to think of practical ways to do that. And a vegetable garden is probably one of the best ways to do that. You can not only save money and do all the things I just mentioned, but you can also be growing fresh, nutritious vegetables that are higher nutrients than even the vegetables you get at the farmer's market or local co-ops, because you'll be picking them right out of the garden and eating them soon afterwards. So there'll be very little chance for those nutrients to degrade. And also you'll know what's on top of them, what's on those vegetables, what's sprayed on them. If there's any concern about E. coli or salmonella, things like that, you're going to be in control of it. You'll be in charge of it. And in the book we talk about I talk about designing a 20 by 30 foot vegetable garden and growing all your regular vegetables that will be in there. Tomatoes, peppers, lettuces, cabbages, beans, squash, all those kinds of things. And growing them in the garden as you normally would in a 20 by 30 square foot garden. And what I did is a little research and found out that you could produce over 330 pounds of vegetables from that garden.
Wow.
That's a lot of pounds of vegetables. And then I just kind of went into some of the USDA sites and found out what the average price per pound for these different vegetables would be around the country and kind of averaged them all out. And I came up with a number that you could save over $600 just by growing a simple little 600 square foot vegetable garden.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's pretty amazing that you can do that. And the National Gardening Association has a survey they do every year, and in that survey they found that there's about 40 million vegetable gardeners out there. So I have a term that I've been using called the gross national garden product. You hear these economists talk about the gross national product. Well, here's the gross national garden product. So you multiply the 40 million vegetable gardeners by the $600 per vegetable garden that they can actually raise, and it's over $24 billion is what people are producing in food in this country right now. So it's a tremendous impact on what home gardeners can do, and that's only the beginning. There's only about 1 in 3 people out there vegetable gardening, so there can be a lot more people doing it, and you can imagine if we doubled or tripled that number, how much food we can be producing right in our own neighborhoods.
Now, can people phone you up if they have a problem with their garden?
Well, yes. One of the things I do is I'm a garden consultant and I'm a coach too. So yes, you definitely can phone me up and visit my website at charlienardozzi.com for all that contact information. And coaching is kind of an interesting idea. It's a little bit different than a consultant, and it's a little bit different than a landscaper. You know, a consultant would come in and actually kind of tell you what to do and then leave you to decide what to do with it. A landscaper will come in and do it all for you. A coach comes in and, working with you, kind of decides what needs to be done, and then comes back and actually does the work with you to show you how to do it. So for example, if you need to prune your roses, or if you need to set up a raised bed vegetable garden, a coach would come in, kind of work with you a little bit, get you going, and then you'd finish the job on your own. So it's kind of like do it yourself with a little help, with a little knowledgeable guide to help you along, get you started in the right path.
I didn't know that latter possibility was available.
Yeah, there's more and more people doing it, not just with gardening, but with life coaching and spiritual coaching and all kinds of different things. And the whole idea behind it is to have someone who can be objective and help you figure out what you need to do, how you need to get to what your goals are, and give you suggestions of doing that, but really enable you or empower you to get to that place where you can do it yourself. So yes, vegetable gardening is becoming very popular, and there's lots of resources out there. My website, books, Master Gardeners is another place you can go for information about vegetable gardening. But one of the simple things you can do with your vegetable garden is to start small. And that's what I always tell people. Start small, get a little raised bed, maybe even a 3x6 or a 4x8 raised bed, and you'll be amazed how much you can produce even in that small bed. And if you just have lawn around your yard, or you have a weedy patch where you're thinking of putting your raised bed, there's a fun little technique you can use to actually not have to dig out the sod or dig out the soil, but work on top of it. It's called lasagna gardening.
Lasagna?
Lasagna, just like the Italian meal, Lee. Lasagna gardening. So, do you make lasagna, Lee?
Yes.
Okay, so you do it in layers, right? You put your noodles down, you put some cheese in, maybe some vegetables, and then some sauce, and then you put another layer. Well, lasagna gardening takes that same concept and does the same thing, but just using organic matter instead of pasta noodles. I guess you could use pasta noodles if you really wanted. But what you do is, it's best to do this in the fall, but you can still get away with doing it this time of year, is to mark out the area where you want your vegetable garden, and then get some newspaper, black and white newspaper. I hear vegetables love 7 days, so get 7 days. There's a lot of those around. Black and white newspaper, and then put down about 4 layers of it over that area. You want to wet it too before you put it down, because if you don't, it might just blow right away. So put 4 layers down in that area. Then on top of that, you want to put about a 6 to 8 inch thick layer of hay or straw. And straw is better than hay because it doesn't have the weed seeds in it, but hay is a lot cheaper and a lot more available. So whatever you can find, you can use. And then on top of that, you want to put a 2 inch thick layer of compost. So you have this lasagna of newspaper, hay or straw, and compost on top of that. And then you just want to let it sit. And what happens is it starts breaking down, and the earthworms start coming up from the subsoil area, and they start munching on the newspaper. They love the entertainment guide in 7 days. They'll be munching on that especially really well. And by doing that, they're creating all these air and water spaces in the soil, so that when your plants are growing through this lasagna, they'll be able to go down into the soil and get all the nutrients and water they need. And if you do it in the fall, by the spring, by May, it's ready to plant. You really don't have to do anything else other than dig a hole in the top of it and pop your transplants in. Now, if you started this time of year in March, it's not going to have enough time to really break fully down. So what you'll probably want to do is maybe use a little bit more compost on top of it, maybe a 4-inch thick layer. And then when you plant in May or June, you might want to wait to plant a little bit later, and you might want to use transplants instead of seeds, so your plants can get off to a better start. But it should still work. By the end of the summer, you'll see that this area that you created as a raised bed will have flattened down, have broken down dramatically, and the plants, amazingly enough, will just have grown without you having to weed, without you having to dig up the sod, break your back, amend the soil in any other way. So it's a nice technique, Lee, to use to really kind of get the garden going without having to try to till up a whole big area.
I like it.
Good. We'll build one in your yard.
All right. All right.
So raised bed gardening has a lot of advantages, and I kind of mentioned it already, but when you raise them up, you can raise them up, as I mentioned, just by building organic matter on top of itself, or you can use boards, bricks, stone, anything to outline it that's going to keep everything kind of raised up. You want to avoid pressure-treated lumbers because they have chemicals in them that might leach into the soil, and you don't want to have those. But cedar and hemlock works just fine. There's a lot of these plastic woods or composite woods that are out now that will last for years and years without breaking down. So you want to build your raised bed so that it's at least about 8 to 10 inches tall and about 3 to 4 feet wide, and as long as you want to make it. Doesn't really matter how long it is. If you build it 8 to 10 inches tall, that's going to give your roots a lot of room to really spread out. So you can even build the raised bed on top of gravel, an old gravel driveway, or even on top of asphalt if you have to. It's best to do it, of course, on top of the earth, but if you don't have the space for it, build it where there's full sun, so you can get at least 6 hours of sun a day. It's close to the house, so you don't forget about it, and a place where you have water, so you can easily water it and take care of it. If you put it in the right location like that, then your raised bed is bound to be a success. So Lee, once you get that raised bed built up a little bit, and then you put a little compost in it, then you can just plant directly into it. And what's nice about it, if you only do it about 3 to 4 feet wide, is that you don't have to step in it. And by stepping in a raised bed, you're compressing the soil, compacting the soil down, and it's inhibiting the root growth. By not stepping on it, you'll have better root crops. Carrots grow better, beets grow better, bigger plants like tomatoes, peppers, they all grow really well. Potatoes grow really well in raised beds. So you can plant pretty much anything in a raised bed. You might want to avoid corn unless you have some way of trellising it up because it may blow over being up even taller than normal. But other than that, most anything would do really well growing in a raised bed.
I like your idea of raised bed because it makes your gardening more scientific and more exacting.
Yes, exactly. And if you're really someone who's geometrically minded, I don't know if you're like that, Lee. You know, you like straight lines, you like straight edges, those kinds of things. There's a technique called square foot gardening that you can use in your raised bed. And what you do is you set up your raised bed and then you mark out 1 foot squares in the raised bed. So if it's 3 by 6, for example, then you'd have 3 squares going across and 6 squares going down. And in each one of those squares, you plant the right number of plants. And there's actually a book called Square Foot Gardening that you can get that can do that. You can go online. There's a kitchen garden planner online at gardeners.com where you can actually visit their website and design it right online and then take that design and put it in your garden. It's kind of a cool little transfer of technology that you can do. But what's nice about it is that in each square you'll know exactly how many plants to plant. So for example, maybe you plant 4 bean plants in one square, 1 tomato in another because of course it gets much bigger, and maybe 6 arugula plants in another. And it's all kind of scientifically done to know what fits in each square. And you grow them in there, you grow them to fruition, and when the arugula is done or the radishes are done, you pull them out, put something else in. And that's called succession planting. By continually doing that, you're actually going to be producing even more from that raised bed than if you just put 1 crop in and forgot about it.
Now, do people get together and compare notes about their gardening?
Yeah, actually, if you don't have space to garden, if you're in an apartment or you just don't have a lot of sun to garden, because I mentioned you really need 6 hours of full sun. If you get 2 or 3, you probably can go greens and maybe some of the root crops like carrots and beets. But if you have even less than that, it might be best to look for a community garden. And in the Burlington area, South Burlington, a lot of the communities now, even across the state, have community gardens to them. And in Burlington, it's run through the Parks and Recreation Department, and I believe there's 7 or 8 different sites around town. And if you contact Parks and Rec, they can tell you where the site is closest to your home. And you can go down there, and what's fun about it is that for a small fee, you can rent a 20 by 30 plot, and then you can even split it with someone if that seems like too big. And what you end up doing is you end up gardening with a lot of other people. You've got a whole host of other people in the garden, and what's fun about it is that you have people from all different walks of life. You've got experienced gardeners who've been doing it for years and years, and so they have lots of information and knowledge to share with you. You get people who are here from different countries through the Refugee Resettlement Program and just immigrants in general, from Eastern Europe, from Southeast Asia, from all over the world, from Africa. And so you see sometimes in these community gardens amazing things being grown, crops that you've never really thought of before, because those are part of their heritage, part of their culture, and they want to grow them here too. So it's a good way to actually garden with other people, and you learn things, and you're able to garden even if you don't have the space to garden. It's a great technique to do, and a great way to be involved in your community. There's a couple different organizations. I mentioned the Parks and Recreation Department. There's the Friends of the Burlington Gardens, which is a nonprofit organization that helps oversee the gardens and run the gardens, and not only here, but also is involved in a statewide network too. So there's lots of ways you can get involved in community gardening.
I'm curious why we haven't had any phone calls.
I don't know. Maybe we're not talking about the right things, Lee.
Come on, you all.
Yeah, give us a call. I'm here to answer gardening questions, vegetable gardening questions, any really kind of questions that you might have. Definitely give us a call. We'll be here for a good another half hour or so, and we could talk about houseplants. We can talk about flowers. We could definitely talk about lawns, because people are going to get out there and start raking their lawns soon. I don't know if you grow many houseplants, Lee, in your house.
We have quite a few.
Oh, you do? Yeah? Do you have any favorites in there?
Well, my wife does. She has a green thumb.
Yeah. Any
orchids?
And African violets.
Orchids and African violets.
Orchids and African violets, yeah. Orchids are fun to grow, especially the moth orchid. I don't know if you have those. The flowers are shaped like little moths, and they're one of the easiest ones to grow. They're called Phalaenopsis is the botanical name for them. And they are one of the easiest ones to grow because they're adapted to the indoor light and temperature conditions that we usually have. So they're pretty forgiving for being inside. And if you put them in a sunny window and you keep them maybe around 70 during the day and more in the 60s at night, they're going to flower for you. And my wife Wendy and I have one that's literally been flowering for 3, 4, 5 months. And before that, it flowered for about 6 months. And then we just said, we got to give this plant a rest. It's working too hard. So we cut the flower stalk off, and then it rested for maybe a month, and then all of a sudden it sent up another flower stalk. So that's what's great about the orchids, is that the flowers last a long time. As long as you don't overwater them, you're going to have those flowers for a number of months.
Water is sometimes not good for plants.
Yes, orchids are actually a parasitic plant. There's something when you see them in the jungle. I don't know if you've ever traveled in the tropics, places like Costa Rica or Thailand where there's lots of orchids growing. You'll just see them kind of hanging in the trees, hanging on the bark. They literally are just living off of the bark and off of what's in the atmosphere around them, and they don't really need soil like a lot of plants need. So when you're growing orchids, especially things like the moth orchid, you need a special potting mix. It's mostly like bark chips. And you put the plant in that and you keep it moist, and it needs that well-drained soil. It doesn't want to sit in really wet soil. And that's probably one of the big things that kills houseplants, not only orchids, but lots of other plants, is overwatering them, putting too much water in there. Not that you do that to your wife's plants, Lee. You're not out there overwatering things. But it's tempting in the winter when you have not much going on and the plants are green and you want to do something with them. You're kind of itching to work in the soil or work with plants. It's hard not to get out there and water them, but that's probably the number one thing that'll kill a house plant immediately, is just overwatering it. So resist the temptation, especially in the winter.
That's good to know that.
Yeah. And this time of year with houseplants, one of the things you can do is start to repot them. You know, the days are getting longer, the sun is stronger, it's brighter. The houseplants, you might notice, are actually starting to grow again. They're actually starting to put on some new growth, maybe some flower stalks, things like that. If they're just putting on new growth without flowers, it's a good time of year to actually take them out of their old pot, knock off all that old soil, and just kind of get rid of it and put some fresh soil in. If you do that every 2-3 years or so, your plant will really respond with better growth and better flowering. And you also may want to clean out that pot, because what happens over time is that pot will build up salt residues all around the edge. Actually, if you have clay pots, Lee, you might notice those white kind of crustation around them. That's salt residue from fertilizer salts or things that are in the soil. So if you can clean out those pots with a bleach solution, like a 10% bleach solution, and then put some fresh potting soil in there, and if the plant looks like it's root bound, you know, if the roots are kind of swirling around and are really kind of all over the place, and it seems like it's more roots than soil, then you might want to get a pot that's one size larger. So don't go up too big, but if you have a 10-inch pot, go to a 12-inch pot, for example, and put that in there with some potting soil. And if you want to put some fertilizer in, I like using the time-release fertilizer. And there's some organic versions of this now that you can just put on the soil, and over time it slowly releases every time you water the plant. And what that does is it'll feed the root system slowly, so that the plant will grow slowly, but it'll continually be fed right through the summer and fall. So it's a good thing to do this time of year, to repot your houseplants, get them kind of all situated, getting them ready for this big spurt of growth that's happening starting right now in March. So, you know, it is March. The days are longer. The sun is stronger, so you're probably noticing a lot of things happening outside too. The sap is flowing. Great weather for sap flowing. I don't know if you're a big maple syrup fan, Lee, or not, but
Oh, yes.
yeah. I don't do much tapping, but I like to eat it. But this is perfect weather for the sap flow. You get bright sunny days above freezing, and then at night, of course, it gets dark every night.
Really?
Yeah, I noticed that. It gets below freezing too. So when you get it below freezing at night and above freezing during the day, with the bright sun, that's really going to pull the sap up from the roots up into the tree, and then of course it's going to start flowing dramatically. But it also starts initiating a lot of other things that will be happening in the landscape. Your lawn, by the way, how is your lawn, Lee? Did it do okay this winter? Are you seeing signs that it's coming back to life yet?
Some signs. It's always struggles.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough, especially if you have lawn near a driveway or near the roadway, where plows might have ripped out some of the sod, or you might have gotten a lot of salt thrown on it. And salt really can cause a lot of harm in the lawn. Now we use it, and the road crews use it for good reason, because of all the ice and the snow and things, and you want to make the road safe. But what ends up happening is that salt runs off the road and into the lawn areas right near the road. So you probably have noticed this. There's a lot of dead areas right along either your driveway or right along the road. That's a lot of times because of salt buildup. Now there's a couple things you can do. First of all, in your driveway and walkways, you can not use any kind of salts. Instead, use sand, or use things like kitty litter. Some people have actually had success using kitty litter, and that will not harm the grass next to it. But if it is harmed, or if it's near the road where the road crews have been spreading the salt, what you can do this time of year is flush the salt out of the soil. And it's actually, it seems counterintuitive, because right now you'd be thinking, well, I don't really want to put more water on the lawn because it's already sogged from all the melting snow. But actually, it's a good thing to do this time of year, is to just get your hose out there and then just flush out all those dead areas and around the dead areas too, even in the areas that look like they're alive. And that's going to dissolve those salts and flush them into the soil and the subsoil and out of that lawn, away from the root systems. If you can get the salt away from the root systems, then the lawns have a chance to come back again. Now, Lee, if it seems like the root system actually didn't make it through the winter and you got a dead area, then in a little while, it's a little early yet to do it, but probably in April, maybe a month from now, would be a good time to rake out all that dead grass, bring in a little compost, spread it on top, and then reseed that lawn, reseed that area. And if you do it in April when the temperatures are warmer and the soil temperature is warm, it'll actually sprout up really quickly and it'll fill in quickly, so you have less chance of weeds getting in there. So those are some things you can start doing with your lawn and start doing and thinking about them now. The flushing of the salts is definitely something you can do now. The reseeding of the lawn, you can wait a little while on that one.
Mud ruts in this lawn, what do you say about that?
And yes, if you have mud ruts in your lawn, so if somebody related to you decided to get a little wild and crazy with their car, driving across the lawn and stuff like that. So this time of year, there's really not a lot you want to do with that yet. You can try to, if it has sod that's been pulled up or there's ruts, you can try to fill them in a little bit. But you're really going to do most of that repairing and patching probably more towards April, when you can get in there with some fresh soil, fill in those ruts, and the ground will actually have settled. Right now the frost is coming out of the ground, so you'll see it's kind of an odd shape sometimes. It's high in one place, low in another. That's all going to settle out in the next month as the thaw continues through the soil and it actually settles everything down. Once that's done, then you can come in and put some soil and reseed it.
What does it mean when you say that the frost is coming out of the soil?
Well, the frost is coming out of the soil. What that really means is that any kind of frost crystals that were in the soil from the cold weather in the winter, they're thawing out, they're breaking down. Now when they're in the soil, they create this unusual and upending, up and down areas in your lawn and in your garden too, because those crystals expand. But as they start shrinking and start melting, everything shrinks back down again. So that takes a little while for that to happen, because the frost, depending on how deep it is into the soil, it may take a week or two to actually have it all melt out. Even though we've had warm air temperatures up close to 50 this week, the soil temperature is probably still close to freezing, and it still has some frost pretty deep. All you need to do is dig down a little bit and you'll probably hit a frost layer. So yeah, taking care of the lawn, it's a good thing to do this time of year. And as we get a little bit further into the season, as the forsythias start blooming, which are one of our first shrubs to bloom every year, when we start seeing them bloom, that's a sign that you might want to spread some organic crabgrass control. Now, crabgrass is one of those weeds that lots of people have trouble with in their lawns. And it comes up really early in the season. Most people see it in the summer and they think, oh, what can I do now to control it? Well, really the time to control crabgrass is early in the season, and the indicator or the phenological sign, phenology is the study of what to do based on what's going on in nature. So that old axiom, you plant corn when the oak leaves are the size of a mouse's ear. That's what it is. I was going to say a squirrel's ear, but maybe it's a mouse's ear. That's called phenology. So there's another phenology sign you can use, which is when the forsythia are blooming. That's when the crabgrass seed is actually starting to germinate. It's actually starting to grow. And you can put down a corn gluten herbicide. Now, corn gluten is just what it sounds like. It's a byproduct of the corn industry, and it's just corn. There's nothing else added to it. But what they found, what researchers have found, is that corn gluten is an herbicide. It'll kill germinating seeds. So you spread that on your lawn area when the forsythia are blooming and the crabgrass is trying to germinate, and it'll kill those seeds as they start germinating. So you won't have crabgrass to worry about later in the season. So if you have any questions, garden questions, or questions about your lawn, questions about your vegetable garden, pruning, you can just give us a call. We're here for a little while longer. I'd be happy to answer any kind of garden question. You can also visit my website at charlienardozzi.com, and there's a bunch of information there as well.
What's the phone number? A lot of people don't know their way around.
Well, you can go on the screen. There's a phone number for giving us a call here at the show if you have a garden question. We do have a few more minutes left, about 10-20 more minutes left in the show, so we have plenty of time if people want to give a call. They have something they're wondering about, even if it's a potted plant. Maybe someone gave you a beautiful florist azalea or a hydrangea for the holidays, and you're wondering what to do with it. You can give us a call now, and I'll try to help you out with that plant.
Who's the point set of questions?
There is right, and there's always You know, we talked about house plants. I talked about repotting house plants, but these holiday plants, there's always a poinsettia question and the Christmas cactus question. Do you have any Christmas cactus in your house? Does your wife grow those? You know, those flowers?
I do have poinsettia.
But you have some poinsettia, maybe? Poinsettias? They're actually pronounced poinsettia. Juan de la Poinsett is the man who actually, the Spanish guy who discovered them, quote unquote, in Mexico. Of course, they were growing there long before he was there. But they're a beautiful perennial plant if you go to warmer climates, Southern California, Mexico, places like that. They grow like a shrub. But we grow them, or we have them for the holidays. And poinsettia is one of those house plants that I usually tell people, don't bother. You know, you want to save it, you want to try to get it to come back next year, but there's a lot of work that's involved in getting a poinsettia to come back. What you'll have to do is this time of year, cut it back, so remove all the old leaves and seeds and things like that, cut it back to about 6 inches or so, 8 inches tall, and then give it some water and fertilizer, and then put it in a sunny window, and keep it in that sunny window until you can bring it back outside again. So say May or June, bring it outside, fertilize it, keep it in a place where it gets the morning sun, and just let it grow. Just let it keep going. It'll fill out, it'll re-leaf out, it'll start looking beautiful. And then in the fall, that's when you have to do the hard part. Come September, you have to bring it back inside, and then you have to cover it with a bag or put it in a closet, somewhere where it's going to get no light for about 14 hours a day. No light, zero light. But the key is you can't just leave it in the bag for like months. You obviously, every day you have to take it out of the closet or take it out of the bag, put it in a bright sunny spot, then that night put it back again, and if you miss a few days, you blew it. That's the hard part with poinsettias. So you do that starting in September, you do it for about 6 weeks, and then by November, hopefully those bracts, or what we call, people call them the flowers, but they're really bracts, they're modified leaves, start turning the color that you want. Then when they start turning that color, you can just put them out and enjoy them right through the holiday. So you can do it, it just takes a little work. I usually tell people, poinsettias, compost pile. That's the best place for them. Not that you should do that, Lee. If you want to keep your poinsettia, you can keep yours.
We shouldn't quote you on that.
Don't quote me on that. But Christmas cactus is another one that's pretty easy to grow. This time of year, mine in our house are blooming on and off right through to the spring and summer. If they're having a hard time blooming, what you can do is cut back on their watering, don't fertilize them, put them in a bright spot and put them in a cooler location. Sometimes that's what they need to really stimulate those flower buds to form. Once you find the right spot for a Christmas cactus, leave it there. They're happy, they'll keep growing, they'll keep blooming. Like I said, we have probably 4 or 5 different ones, and they're blooming from November till May and June. On and off, different ones blooming at different times. And actually, Lee, the Christmas cactus, is the one we grow, is really a hybrid of a couple different types of cactus. There's a Thanksgiving cactus, there's a Christmas cactus, and there's an Easter cactus, which is coming up, by the way, another week or two. And they all are different versions or species of the original Christmas cactus. The Thanksgiving cactus actually blooms early, Christmas one around Christmas time, and Easter one a little bit later. Now, most of the ones you get in garden centers and home centers, those are usually a hybrid of the Thanksgiving and Christmas, but you will be able to find ones that will bloom a little bit later too. So by having 2 or 3 different kinds, or by sharing them, they're really easy to propagate and share with other people. You can have beautiful blooms right through the winter when we're really looking for some nice color. And sharing them, as I was mentioning, propagating them, really kind of an easy thing to do. All you need to do is just take some cuttings from the ends. They maybe about 4 to 6 inches from the tip. Go back, cut right where that little bract is, and maybe dip it in some rooting hormone powder. You can get this at most garden centers. It's just a little white powder that's a natural hormone that helps the plant root. Then just stick it in a pot filled with moistened potting soil. You can put 4 or 6 of them in those pots. And then put them in a bright spot, but not in the full sun. And maybe even put a clear plastic bag over them, poke some holes in them so they don't dry out. Then just leave them there. It'll take maybe 3-4 weeks or so, but you'll start seeing some new growth forming on these little cuttings, and you can tug them just gently tug them. And if they have a little resistance, then you know that they've rooted. Then you can give them away. You can give them to your neighbor, Lee, and you can have Christmas cactus. You said you don't have Christmas cactus, right? So maybe you need a few plants in your house. A few of the new ones. So there's some little tips that you could do with some of those flowering indoor plants. If you're growing the Florist azalea, which is the one that's often given at Christmas as a holiday plant, as a gift to people. That is not a hardy azalea. That one, if you put it outside, it will not make it through our winter. So there's a couple things you can do. You can just enjoy it right now if it's all flowers are past and you got some nice green foliage on it. Enjoy it till May, then plant it outside and just enjoy it all summer long. And then come fall, we'll treat it as an annual. Just let it kind of die off. Don't worry about it. Another thing you can try to do, though, is to put it back outside in the summer, let it grow, but leave it in its pot and put it out there. And then in the fall, come September, October, take it out of the ground, but in its pot, and bring it indoors. Sometimes you can actually get them to actually flower again. If you have a bright greenhouse-like window or a bay window in the south, you might have enough light so they'll actually flower again for you, and you can get some more flowers from them. But chances are they're probably not going to make it back, so probably best to just treat those as an annual. The same thing actually goes true for the hydrangeas too. There's a florist hydrangea that you often get as a gift this time of year, or sometimes in Easter it's given too. Easter lilies. We'll talk about that one next, Lil. Remind me about Easter lilies. But the florist hydrangea, big pom-pom flowers, those are not hardy this far north. So again, that's one of those, kind of enjoy it while you've got it and then just kind of let it go. But Easter lilies are. Easter lilies are fun to get, and this time of year it's great to go to a garden center and pick up an Easter lily. I love the fragrance. Lee, you probably are familiar with that really strong scented fragrance.
Oh, yes.
Of the Easter lily. Yeah, it's really a great one to have in the house. One plant will just scent the whole house. Now, some people may not like it. I really like it. But the nice thing about Easter lilies is they are hardy. If you're in the Champlain Valley, if you're in the banana belt, that's what I call the Champlain Valley, you can actually plant them outside once they're done flowering. So let the flowers bloom, enjoy them, cut back the flower stalk, but leave the leaves, and then in May, plant them outside in a well-drained sunny spot, maybe close to the house, close to a place where they're going to be protected. And so put them there, and what will happen is that next year they'll bloom, but they won't bloom in Easter. They'll bloom more likely in the summer where the other lilies are blooming. But they do come back sometimes for a couple years in a row. So it's the kind of plant that you can give as a gift that you can enjoy now. And as the cliche goes, it's a gift that keeps giving. right through the summer. So Easter lily is a great plant to have this time of year. And if you go to a garden center, Lee, when you're buying one for your wife, you do every year, I'm sure, buy an Easter lily for your wife. Well, you should be, because they're great plants. But when you're actually buying one of the Easter lilies, what you want to look for is a plant that has green leaves right down to the soil. You don't want to get any that have yellow leaves down near the soil. That means it might be rotting out a little bit. And also, don't buy one that have a lot of flowers already open. Maybe one or two is okay, but most of them should still be in the bud form. That's going to extend the flowering period for weeks beyond what you normally have. And by doing that, you'll be able to enjoy it beyond Easter into April, maybe even beyond that too. If you keep it cool in the house, you'll find out that they actually open up slower and they'll last a little bit longer than if they're in the bright sun in really hot conditions. So by doing that, you can have Easter lilies and the fragrance and the beauty of Easter lilies for weeks and weeks. Another thing you can do to actually prevent the flowers from closing up really fast is to cut out the interior parts of them, the stamen and the pistil and all those other botanical terms for the pollen centers inside of the plant. You just take a scissors when the flower opens, and you'll see they're right in there. Just snip them out. You have to be careful. They'll stain you, though. They can stain tablecloths. They can stain clothes. So just snip them out. And what happens is that will cause the flower to stay open a little bit longer than if you let those sexual reproduction organs stay right in there, because that's what they are. Yeah, so Easter lilies are a great thing to have. And we have a few more minutes on the show, another 10 minutes or so. So if you have any questions about plants indoors, house plants, garden plants outside, what to select, what's new in the garden, what you'd like to have in your garden, tips on lawn care, pruning, anything like that, just give us a call. Numbers on the screen. We're here, Lee and I, chatting up a storm about gardening. So there are, when you were young, Lee, did you have a garden when you were growing up?
When I was young? I'm still young.
Well, when you were younger.
Yes. Yes, of course.
Uh-huh.
My mother was a great gardener.
Yeah, yeah. Was it a vegetable garden or a flower garden?
Well, we had something called a victory garden.
Oh, yeah.
That was World War II, and we had about 2 acres of gardening because we wanted to help the war effort.
Yeah.
And so everyone was encouraged, if you had any land at all, to plant it and grow crops.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't for beauty or flowers, it was for crops. I enjoyed it.
Uh-huh. And did you have favorite vegetables?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like tomatoes, like most people?
Oh, I always liked tomatoes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I did discover, though, when I moved to Vermont, that that the deer like some of our plants.
Sometimes like them as much as we do.
That's right, and so you have to be careful about what you expect you're going to get.
Yeah. Yeah, even in our neighborhood, which is not that far out into the woods, we have deer problem. I have deer problem every year there. They nibble on everything from my blueberry bushes to the tulips when they come up in the spring. Yep. To vegetables. They don't seem to bother the vegetables too much, because I think by summer there's a lot of other things in the forest to eat. But those early season things they really go after.
I have a friend who's a physician, and he says that if you know what to plant, you can plant something that will keep away carnivorous animals. It works. It's amazing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are lists of deer-resistant plants, but I always take those with a grain of salt, because I think if deer are hungry enough, they'll eat pretty much anything. But in general, if you're trying to grow plants that deer don't like, you want to stick with plants that have fuzzy leaves, like lamb's ears is a good one. Succulent leaves to them, things like sedums, for example. They don't like those. Any of the pungent leaves, like mints, they're not going to go after those. But if you have a thorny plant, like roses, for example, they always munch on my roses if I don't protect them. Yep, even with the thorns and stuff, they go after the new growth, which doesn't have as much thorn. But yeah, they'll go after the roses too. Yeah, it's a long winter for them, and they're looking for food, and there's no hunting that's happening in Shelburne that I know of recently. So there's not a lot of pressure on them as far as predators. So there's a lot of deer that are roaming around. Of course, if you have deer, if you have deer in your yard, you can grow plants that are less likely for them to eat. But you can also put fencing up around too. And an electric fence works pretty well with them. And the key with electric fence is to have 2 strands. One that's maybe about 1 foot tall, and the other about 4 or so feet tall, and to bait it early in the season with peanut butter.
Really?
Yes. It can be,
why would you do
any
that?
kind of peanut butter. What you're trying to do is trying to lure them in so that they actually are munching on the peanut butter, and they'll get a shock. And what you're doing is you're training them early in the season that this area is a place they're going to get a shock if they go into it. So if you do that in the spring, early in the season, when they're really hungry and they get shocked a number of times, they'll tend not to come back to that area again. They'll go somewhere else because they know that that's where it's kind of a dangerous spot for them. So it's a good way to train the deer not to come into your yard. And once you've got them trained in the summer, you can just turn the fence off. You don't even have to keep it going, and that'll keep them out.
Intriguing.
Unless, of course, you have little bunnies wandering around, or woodchucks, or something like that. Some of the other animals that are out there, you might want to keep the fence on for them, because they're a little harder to train. Now, bunnies are pretty easy. You just put any kind of wire fence around your garden or around your favorite flowers, and they'll stay away from it. You can also grow a little patch of clover for them, which is really nice. If you have a lawn area, plant some clover kind of off to the side somewhere, and they'll kind of spend most of their time over there munching on the clover and less time munching in your garden.
I'm getting a different picture of you now, being worried about the bunnies and providing food for them during the winter.
Well, it's nice, you know, everyone's got to survive. So if you could provide a little food for the bunnies, and the clover is good for the lawn too. It's going to fix the nitrogen fertilizer in the lawn, and it's going to actually help your lawn be greener and grow better. You know, clover's kind of gotten a bad rap for being a weed in the lawn, but really it's one of the more beneficial plants that you can grow in the lawn. And each lawn should have maybe 10 to 15% clover in it.
Wow.
And it's also going to attract bees, and, especially get the little white clover, has those little white flowers. Bees love that. And the bunnies will munch on the leaves too and keep them healthy. All of this is creating a nice ecological landscape in your yard so that you're working with nature as opposed to fighting nature and trying to keep the animals and diseases and insects all out. It's better to work with nature by planting things that are compatible with them and planting them in a healthy way so that your landscape will be good for you and good for the environment too.
I like what you're saying.
Yeah. You can do that in a lot of different ways too. You can use shrubs that have berries on them for the birds. Viburnums are a great shrub for that. You can grow edible shrubs for yourself. Instead of growing burning bushes and forsythia around the house, what you can do is grow things like blueberries or gooseberries or currants. All these are small shrubs that look beautiful. They can grow anywhere from 2 to 4, 6 feet tall. They're nice landscape shrubs, and they produce an edible crop without a lot of care. And I don't know if you've ever had gooseberries before, Lee.
Oh, I like gooseberries.
Oh, you do? Yeah, yeah. They're really easy crop to grow. And the plant itself only gets maybe 2, 3 feet tall. And we have just one. All you need is one. You don't really need a couple of them. And we get a bunch of berries from them. The only problem we ever had was that one year the squirrels got the berries too. And I literally saw a squirrel munching on the berries, sucking out the juices from the gooseberry and leaving the skins right on the rock. So there's a little pile of skins, and he sucked all the juice out of the inside of the gooseberries.
Since we're talking about animals and plants and wildlife, some people don't realize that there are books that have the actual true call of a bird. So if you want to hear what a grosbeak will sound like, you press a button, and you get the sound of a grosbeak.
Yeah, online you could do that. You
Yeah.
get the exact sound of what it is.
It's wonderful. It's not just a fake.
Right. Yeah, and there's an amazing amount of resources on websites where you can identify weeds if you're not sure if a plant coming up is a weed or not. You can identify insects if you're wondering if this insect is a problem in your garden or not, and even diseases. So the internet is a great place to go to find all those resources to help you be a better gardener and a smarter gardener, because a lot of times you don't have to control things.
Cornell University does this.
Cornell University is one of those. Yeah, that's one of those. A lot of the state universities, even UVM, University of Vermont, has websites. I mentioned the Master Gardeners earlier. You can call them. They have an 800 number that you can find through their website. Just Google University of Vermont Master Gardeners. You can find their website. And that's a place you can go to answer gardening questions. I actually have a radio show on Thursday mornings where you can call in if you have a gardening question on WJOY. So there's a lot of resources that are out there where you can call in and find out what problem you have and get a solution to.
So we can get you later in the week.
Yes, you can catch me on Thursday mornings, 9 to 10, WJOY. Just listen to the dial, and we're announcing the phone number, and it's a call-in show. That's all it is. It's a service for people so they can call in and get their garden questions answered.
Well, I challenge all of you listeners to call up our friend here and get your questions about life, wildlife answered. And gardening. Don't just hear all of this, but do it.
Yeah, that's the key. Just get out there and spend a little time in the garden. It's a great thing. It's very therapeutic. It saves you money. It's a great way to spend time with family and friends and your neighbors too. It's just a nice thing to do.
Thank you, Charlie, for being here today.
It's been great to be here, Lee. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you for coming.